Hello, and welcome to Nursing Research Tips, a show dedicated to sharing best practices, tips, and other resources within the areas of nursing research and evidence-based practice. I'm your host, Jenny Barrow, Associate Professor of Undergraduate Nursing, who specializes in teaching students real-world content to help transform their future nursing practice. I enjoy taking the boring world of research and evidence-based practice and making it come alive for my students, and that's what I intend to do with this podcast. On today's episode, we're going to break down what evidence-based practice, or EBP, really means, how it differs from nursing research, and why both matter to the day-to-day role of a nursing student, a staff nurse, or a nurse leader. If you've ever wondered whether a project you're doing is research or just a protocol or policy update, or what role patient preference plays in evidence, you're going to want to keep listening. Get ready to level up your practice with clarity and confidence. Hello, listeners. I want to officially welcome you back to Nursing Research Tips. I'm hopeful that you were able to listen to my previous episode titled, What is Nursing Research Anyway? During that episode, I introduced you to what nursing research is. I shared some examples of how nursing researchers have transformed nursing practice. And I also provided an intro to why nursing research matters in the first place. During that first episode, I threw around the phrase evidence-based practice, but I didn't get too far into what EBP actually is. That's why we need to pause and devote this entire episode to the world of evidence-based practice. You've likely heard the term evidence-based practice, or EBP, thrown around in nursing school and healthcare workplaces, in magnet accreditation meetings, or maybe only when I mentioned it on a previous podcast episode. But what exactly is it, and how is it different from research? That's what we're going to explore today. EBP gets talked about a lot in nursing and other health-related disciplines, but it's often misunderstood. So let's kick things off with the classic, quote, textbook definition. Evidence-based practice, or EBP, is the integration of the best available research evidence paired with clinical expertise and patient preferences, all while taking available resources into account. So that sounds straightforward, right? But let's unpack that, because this isn't just about reading a research article and thinking, okay, I guess we'll do this now. EBP is a decision-making process. It's about using a body of knowledge to guide your practice, not to create brand new knowledge. That would be research. This evidence-based practice is about application. So let's break it down further. First is best research evidence. That's the part that most people recognize. It's the published studies, the clinical trials, the guidelines based on systematic reviews. But it's not just any article that you find online. We're talking about high quality, peer-reviewed evidence that has been appraised and deemed to be trustworthy. But, and this is a big but, this is just one piece of the entire evidence-based practice puzzle. In addition to the best research evidence available, clinical expertise is your nursing judgment. It's the art behind the science. Evidence-based practice doesn't replace your brain, it uses it. You bring your experience, your instincts, your knowledge of what works or hasn't worked in the past, and that's so important. Here's the part we can't skip: patient preferences and values. You could have the most cutting-edge intervention in the world, but if your patient doesn't buy in, or worse, they refuse it outright, it's not going to work. Their values, their goals, lifestyle, and even their fears are all central components to evidence-based practice. Finally, we have to consider what's realistically possible in your clinical setting. Let's say that the evidence supports a fancy silver-impregnated dressing for pressure injuries. Great. But if your hospital formulary doesn't carry the dressing, or if your patient can't afford them after discharge from the hospital, then it's not evidence-based for them. You might instead use the next best available dressing that's still supported by good research and that also works in the context of your patient situation and practicality with resources. Let's drive this point home further with a relatable example. Say you're treating a patient with a stage 3 pressure injury. The latest research suggests that a hydrocolloid dressing might promote better healing than just traditional gauze. Your clinical expertise tells you that this has worked well in the past. Plus, you know, based on your experience, how to correctly apply and manage the dressing and any complications. But your patient is concerned about the cost and how well they will be able to change the dressing at home. So you work together to find an option that balances effectiveness with what they're comfortable with and what you have available in your facility. That is evidence-based practice in action. Here is a key distinction. Evidence-based practice is about applying knowledge, not creating new knowledge. Research is where new knowledge gets created. Evidence-based practice is where we take that knowledge and say, how can I use this in my clinical decision-making today for this patient in this setting? So the next time you hear someone say, oh, we're evidence-based, we just implemented this study we found, press pause. Ask, did you consider your clinical experiences? Did you talk about what your patient really wants? Do you even have the resources to carry this out safely and effectively? Because real evidence-based practice is more than just quoting an article. It's about thinking critically, practicing compassionately, and acting practically. Okay, now that we've covered the definition of evidence-based practice and how it blends research, clinical expertise, patient values, and real-world practicality, let's get into how EBP is different from nursing research and why it's important not to mix the two up. Let's start with nursing research first. Nursing research is all about creating new knowledge. That's the foundation. The questions you ask in nursing research are about discovering the unknown. You're not just improving practice, you're figuring out what works in the first place. Because of that, nursing research often requires Institutional Review Board, or IRB, approval, especially when human participants are involved. You're exploring something that we haven't yet proven. The IRB reviews all of the plans you plan to implement in your study to ensure that your study will be safe, while protecting study participants from potential human subjects ethics violations. For example, imagine you want to study whether a mindfulness program would reduce stress in newly graduated nurses. That's a research question. You would design a study, recruit participants, maybe randomize them into groups, and collect data. The goal is to generate evidence that we didn't have before. That's the core of research. Asking, does this work? And then testing whatever treatment, therapy, or intervention to see if the data supports its use. Now, that's a very basic definition of research. As we will discuss in future episodes, not all research focuses on testing the effectiveness of interventions. So stay tuned to future episodes to learn much more about this topic. Now, let's shift gears to evidence-based practice. What is that again? As a reminder, it's about applying the knowledge that research has already created. You're not asking whether mindfulness works. You're asking which mindfulness techniques would actually work best for my team in our setting with our time and resources that we have available. Let's go back to our mindfulness example. Say that recent research shows several effective stress-reducing techniques, such as deep breathing, guided imagery, or progressive muscle relaxation. As a nurse leader or a bedside nurse, your EBP question becomes, which of these techniques is most practical to implement in our staff break rooms between shifts? Maybe guided imagery requires headphones and a quiet space, while deep breathing could be done in like 90 seconds by the medication cart. EBP is about taking what we know and decided how to use it in practice. So to sum all of this up, research is about generating new knowledge. Evidence-based practice is about applying existing knowledge to improve care. Both are essential, but they're not the same. Now, you might be wondering, where does quality improvement or QI fit into this? That's an excellent question. QI is like the practical cousin within this family. It's often about small scale internal change using data that you already have. You're trying to make a system better, not necessarily prove that something new works. So, an example QI question might be, after introducing a 3-minute mindfulness script before shift change, did staff reported stress levels decrease over the next 4 weeks? You're using internal data, you're testing quickly, and you're often adapting as you go. It's less formal than research. It usually doesn't need IRB approval, and it's focused on measurable improvements within your setting. So here's your quick mental cheat sheet. Research equals new knowledge. Evidence-based practice equals applying knowledge that we already know. And QI, quality improvement, equals improving your system with what you have. All three are powerful. All three help us improve care, but they each play different roles in the bigger picture of nursing practice. So now let's bring this all home. You might be thinking, okay, I get the difference between research and EBP, but why does it really matter? Here's the deal. Understanding these distinctions is not just an academic exercise. It has real consequences for your practice, your workplace, and even your patients. First, it's important to know the differences so that you can participate in the right type of project. Knowing the difference helps you jump into the right project with confidence. Let's say a committee invites you to help reduce hospital falls. If you know you're applying existing evidence in your unit, guess what? That's evidence-based practice. If you're collecting internal fall data and testing a new rounding schedule, that's quality improvement. If someone suggests running a study to see if a never before tested fall prevention intervention would work, now you're talking research. In addition, knowing the differences between QI, evidence-based practice, and research will help you speak the right language if you're writing proposals, or if you're presenting at a staff meeting, or especially if you're collaborating across disciplines. When nurses can clearly say, this is an evidence-based practice initiative, or we conducted a QI project, or we're submitting a research study to the IRB, it builds credibility and shared understanding across disciplines. Knowing the difference also helps you avoid ethical missteps. And that's a big one, ethics. If a nurse mistakenly treats a research project like an EBP change, say by introducing a new untested intervention without IRB approval, that's an ethics problem. Even with good intentions, we have to follow the right processes to protect patients and staff. Knowing the difference helps you avoid those missteps. And here's the best part. You don't have to be a researcher to be a part of evidence-based practice. You don't need a PhD. You don't need to write journal articles. You just need to be curious and willing to ask, what does the evidence say? You also have to be bold enough to use the evidence to make care better. Evidence-based practice is everybody's job, from the bedside to the boardroom. It takes every single one of us to translate knowledge into better care. Now, before we close out this episode, let's shift into EBP detective mode. You're on your unit, attending a huddle, or reading a policy. How do you know if you're looking at evidence-based practice or just old habits? Here are 3 quick questions to help you spot evidence-based practice in action. The first question is, what does the evidence say? This one's simple, but it's powerful. If no one can answer this, or if you hear crickets when you ask, then there's a good chance that what you're doing is not evidence-based practice, because EBP decisions are grounded in research, not just traditions or opinions. Secondly, you could ask, is this just how we've always done it? If the answer is yes, that is your cue to dig deeper. Some practices stick around long after the evidence has changed. EBP invites us to challenge the status quo, respectfully, of course, with curiosity and with facts. The final question we need to ask is, have we checked for the latest guidelines? Guidelines are one of the easiest ways to stay current, especially those from professional organizations or governmental agencies. If your team is not regularly checking them or updating practice based on new releases of guidelines, there is a gap in your EBP process. The bottom line is evidence-based practice doesn't just happen on its own. It takes intentional questions, current sources, and a culture that welcomes curiosity. You don't have to overhaul the whole system tomorrow, but asking these questions is a great place to start. Coming up in episode 3, we're going to dive into quality improvement, or QI, a bit deeper and find out how it fits better into the bigger picture with research and EBP. Spoiler, QI loves small, rapid changes, and it might just be your favorite kind of project, so don't miss that episode. Before we wrap up today's episode, I have a challenge for you. I want you to think back to a time in your practice when you made a decision about patient care. Did you pull from recent research, a clinical guideline? Or if you're honest, was it based on how things have always been done? This is not about guilt, it's about growth. Because the more we reflect on how we use evidence, the better we become at delivering care that's safe, effective, and current. Remember, you don't have to be a researcher to practice evidence-based practice. EBP is everyone's job, and it starts with just asking the right questions. And don't forget, next time we're going to dive into the world of QI projects. We'll talk about how internal data, small-scale changes, and frontline teamwork can make a big impact fast. Thanks for listening to Nursing Research Tips. If you've enjoyed today's episode, hit that follow button. Leave a review or share this episode or this show with a nurse friend or a student that you think could use a little research inspiration. Until next time, keep asking questions and keep making moves based on evidence-based practice.